Yes.
Welcome to a Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co host, Anthony Marquetta. And today we're talking about Epic the Musical and probably the copy edit on the Amanda Sante Odyssey because it's weird. And we had just discovered this. It's very strange. Anthony, how are you
It
doing
is.
today?
I'm having a great old time.
Good. Good. All right, Anthony, why don't you take us away on what exactly is uh
Epic the
Epic the
Musical.
musical? Yes.
All right, cool. So, Epic the Musical is a musical adaptation of the Odyssey. It's by a guy named Jorge Rivera Herranz, I believe, is the full name. He has been chronicling the making of the musical on TikTok and reposting to YouTube. If you don't have TikTok, like normal people, uh,
I don't. Thank goodness I'm not normal.
do you have TikTok?
No.
Good. Anyway,
I thought you
uh,
said ruined the joke.
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm gonna keep going though. Anyway, so no, I'm just gonna keep going. All right, so Epic the Musical, by Jorge Rivera Herranz. It's the brainchild basically of this guy. He has like full creative control of it. It is a surprisingly accurate adaptation in a lot of ways. It is not one to one accurate, nor does it claim to be. He makes several notable changes, which we'll talk about over the course of the discussion. Uh, it has gone viral relatively recently. I would say that the moment I would call it going viral, like semi officially, was when he's releasing them in stages that he calls sagas that he names after whatever like the arc of this portion of the musical is. Uh, so this is the Circe saga. When it came out, sold more on iTunes than Has Been Hotel. I
Oh
believe, which
wow.
yeah, which had just come out, like it was recent. So the fact that he outsold the soundtrack of Has Been Hotel was like unbelievable. Uh, and then like Underworld Saga came out. I'm pretty sure that the Discord for Epic literally crashed because so many people were live streaming it. Like, so I would say that it has reached a point of virality now. Like, it's actually pretty close, if not mainstream, fairly close to mainstream, right? So
Hmm.
I and that means since I watched it before the Circe saga, I was officially hipster. I was a fan before it
He
was
was
cool.
there,
Yeah.
Brian Williams. So, and I was
Yeah.
also there, except I wasn't as enamored because people kept
Yeah.
shoving it
Well,
in my
well,
face and rubbing me against it. It's like, no,
it's
I
true.
don't. Ben like it. I kind of like Warrior of the Mind.
Yeah, so my history with it is that many months ago, probably years, for I do not remember, but I saw a little clip of Warrior of the Mind. It was like on a video that came up on Facebook or something, like scrolling through. There was a clip of the song Warrior of the Mind, and I heard it, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. I'm like, I don't really like that he uses some contemporary language in the song. As it turns out, I was actually not being entirely fair. So Odysseus in the song uses the term badass, uh, and he calls her witty and queen of the best strategies we've seen. And I was like, it's a decent tune. It's kind of catchy, but like I don't really like the modern language. As it turns out, I was actually being a little bit unfair. Like Odysseus does not normally talk like this. This was to represent that this was young child, less mature Odysseus. Uh, So it actually was like appropriate for the song. Uh, I kind of put it out of my mind, except with the idea of like, man, it would be cool if somebody made a full musical of the Odyssey. I did not know that this was part of a full like musical version. I thought it was just some composer doing this as like a project, right? Like, hey, here's a cool thing. Like, here's a bit from a potential Odyssey musical. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that it was a full thing. Then my sister told me about it several months later. She's like, "Yo, this is really cool," and she like played a bit of it, and I recognized Warrior of the Mind's like, "Oh, that dude made a full Odyssey musical out of that." It's like, yeah, he's in the middle of it. So watched it from the beginning, and I'm like, pretty good. And I kept hearing it over, and I gained more and more appreciation. Part of it is that one thing that you realize that there are quite a lot of these concept album type things on YouTube.
Hmm.
Uh, with exceptions, most of them are really bad, right? The
Yeah.
exceptions can be very notable, like for example, the new Albion Radio Hour, which I adore.
Yes.
That's one thing that I am very grateful to you for introducing to me. Actually, one part where our tastes kind of aligned was in
Yes.
the new Albion Radio Hour. Because I still listen to it occasionally. Like I love the new Albion Radio Hour. Uh, Other good examples of it, what is it? Repo the Genetic Opera, right? Which I know
Yes.
you're a huge fan of. Uh, the Who did the Who did a version of this.
I
You know?
remember who you are.
Yep, there you go, Repo.
It's great. I love it. I need to rewatch it. I have it on DVD.
We could do it.
It's
We could do that one
it's
day
got
if you want.
Paris.
Since we're
We
doing,
have, I think, actually.
I think we might have in the past. I'm not as big of a fan of it.
They have
I
surgery
did not
on
hate it.
stage.
They do, yes, but I enjoyed what I heard. I wasn't as big a fan of it. There's also Hades Town, which we did talk about. That was
Yes.
originally a concept album, was turned into a musical, which I also liked a lot. But these are the exceptions, right? Like most of the time, they're really bad. Epic is not, at the very least, I think Ben would agree. It is not really bad.
It
Like
is
there
not bad.
yeah, there is clearly effort. There is clearly like he put in the work to find good singers, to
It
put in like
is.
real instrumentation. So that alone puts it in like the top tier. But over time, I just grew to appreciate it more and more. I really and there are some fascinating videos from Jorge where he talks about like why he made the changes he did. That shows to me at least that like clearly when he was putting this together, he was not going like, "Hey, I'm gonna do this because it's cool," right? Like he very clearly had a vision from beginning to end of what he wanted this to look like, and he's been really pushing that vision. Like the various changes. Here's one big one: Odysseus in this version of the Odyssey in Epic never cheats on Penelope. Now, one thing to note is that it's being released in stages, and we have gotten through the Underworld saga. That's what he calls the first half of it. Uh, that is corresponds to the moment in the Odyssey where Odysseus visits the underworld and meets Tiresias. For those who know what I'm talking about, right? Uh, that's where we're at in the Underworld saga. In this version of it, Odysseus never cheats on Penelope. Now, in the Odyssey, when he meets Circe, the people sometimes try and excuse Odysseus for this. I don't think you entirely can, and I just read this, so I know. Like, I can base this off of the text, right? I don't think Odysseus can be completely protected from what he did with Circe, like completely excused for it. So the story of Circe's Island in the original Odyssey goes something like this: Odysseus shows up. Eurylochus, who is the lead, who is his second in command, right, and who is a family member, he is portrayed in the Odyssey as something of a loser, right? If
Mm.
you actually, the original version of him, kind of a loser. Odysseus even mentions at some point that like he probably would have killed him, except that he was his wife's kinsman because he was like he insulted him or something.
Huh.
So Eurylochus goes off with some men. They find Circe, and then when Circe invites them in, Eurylochus refuses to go in with them because he's afraid. Because Eurylochus is a coward. Uh, like this is the text of the Odyssey, you know. And his men are
It's not
turned.
even
Okay,
subtext. It's
yeah, it's the
text.
text. So Eurylochus runs back and reports all this to Odysseus. Right? Odysseus decides he's going to have to do something, so he's going to go after Circe and rescue his men. Eurylochus refuses to come with him. This is the point where Eurylochus insults Odysseus, and he's like, "No way, man, I'm not doing that," basically, and you're an idiot if you do. Something like that. I don't remember exactly. And Odysseus literally says, like, "I would have killed him, but he was my wife's kinsman." You know. So he goes, but then his men, the surviving men, convince him, just let him stay here and stay back on the ship. So Odysseus goes, fine, right? Hermes stops him and says, "All right, hey, I can help you, but this is a goddess and she has magic powers, right? So, in order to survive her, you're going to need to have this root called Molly. Uh, and once you
Take
have the
this,
root,
Molly. Enter
yeah,
the club.
it's incredible because that's actually what it is. I'm not even memeing. But anyway, uh, and the fact that it's Hermes that gives it to him is also like top tier. But anyway, like it would be Hermes. But anyway, Hermes gives him this. He says, "You're gonna have to take this root. It's called Molly. It's very difficult to get, but I'm a god, so it's easy for me. So take this, and then in order to save your men, you're gonna have to sleep with Cersei. Make sure she promises not to take your manly vigor. That's what my translation called it. So, whatever that means. Make her promise not to take your manly vigor, then sleep with her. And only then will she release your men. So Odysseus agrees to this. He does that, he sleeps with her. Now, notably though, this is where I say, like, you can't entirely accuse Odysseus. Everything up to this point, it's like, okay, Odysseus is in a bind, right? Like, he had to do that. He was literally told to do it by a god. A goddess had his men trapped. But Odysseus stays with Circe for a year. And it's his men who need to go up to Odysseus and beg Odysseus to leave. And when Odysseus goes up to Circe and tells him, I really want to leave, after a year, mind you, it's Circe that says, well, of course you can leave. You could have left at any time. And Odysseus is like, oh, really? She's like, yeah, I wouldn't have stopped you. So this implies that during the course of that year, Odysseus never even attempted to leave. And it's only the prompting of his men that causes Odysseus to leave. So I don't think you can entirely excuse Odysseus here, right? Like he had his opportunities. He decided not to take them. Granted, there is some leeway because it's like, well, his men were safe, right? Like that's a big part of it. I'm sure you could at least try and argue, right, that he was worried for his men if he decided to leave. But the fact that he didn't even try is notable. Calypso, in my opinion, is the more excusable one because he's literally trapped on Calypso's island, Ogygia. Uh, he is sleeping with her throughout the time, but he is very depressed. We actually know this as a fact, unlike other parts of the story where Odysseus is telling the story and he might be lying. We know that the thing with Calypso is true, that he's very depressed because he's trapped on the island because Athena says it, right? Like she says, look at him, he sits on the shore each day, like, brooding. uh, you gotta help the poor guy. So, and he turns down immortality from Calypso, which is a very big sacrifice, right? Which, by the way, Odysseus is sure to bring up the Penelope. He does not mention Circe, uh, but he goes, "Don't worry, baby. I gave up immortality for you." Uh,
Oh.
literally, literally, he says something like, "It never meant anything with Calypso. I gave up immortality for you." And he does not mention Circe. So that's the Odyssey version of it. In Epic the Musical, there is a song called "There Are Other Ways," right? Where he has the everything up to this point is more or less the same with some drama added for the musical. Eurylochus comes back and tells him about what happened. Eurylochus is characterized very differently in Epic. He's seen more like he's Odysseus' second in command. Odysseus is close with him. He trusts him. Eurylochus sometimes doubts Odysseus, but ultimately wants to do the right thing, right? He's contrasted with Odysseus' other friend who dies early on, who has a philosophy that in the musical they call open arms, who believes that you should lead with trust and that you'll get trust in return. Not a very good philosophy for the ancient Greek world. So of course Polites dies. What did you think would happen with a philosophy like that? Uh, it was never going to end well. Uh, but Eurylochus, same thing happens. His men go into the castle. Eurylochus comes back. Eurylochus tells Odysseus not to go. Odysseus goes. Hermes finds him. So you get a song with Hermes called I can't remember the name of the song. Wouldn't You Like, I think. That's what it's called. Wouldn't You Like. They give Hermes' theme gets like a cool 80s synth vibe to it, which I think is nice.
He's
And
flying
fits
around with
Hermes.
his magical guitar instead of a harp.
I think it's pretty cool. I like that vibe for Hermes, the 80s synth thing.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, so Hermes does the same thing, says, hey, you're gonna die if you go in to fight her alone. He does not mention anything about sleeping with Cersei. It's a notable change, right?
Right.
Like seriously though, because it does come up later. So like,
Yeah.
he doesn't mention anything about sleeping with Cersei. He says, however, if you're gonna win, you're gonna need to take this root called moly, and then he makes a joke. I call it holy moly, and then laughs. Uh,
Thank you, Hermes.
anyway,
Very nice.
thank you, Hermes. Very cool. Uh, and he actually Odysseus literally says thank you, and then Hermes goes, "Don't thank me. You very well may die." Uh, so he goes up to fight Cersei. Uh, they have a song where they go back and forth. Uh, a lot of the context is not in the song itself because it's audio, but Jorge himself filled in some of the details. So Ben, you probably don't know about this because you only listened to the song. But
Yeah.
according to Jorge, Cersei summoned a chimera, and Odysseus summoned a cyclops using the magical powers he had for the fight. And Odysseus's cyclops won, and that's how Odysseus was able to get the drop on Cersei. So that's the second song, or the third song, I should say, in the Cersei saga. The first song is introducing the conflict. The second song is Hermes meeting Odysseus. The third song is the conflict between Odysseus and Cersei. And now you have the final song, which is There Are Other Ways. This is where the big change comes in. Odysseus has Cersei at knife point, but as Cersei says, there are other ways of persuasion. And she tries to seduce Odysseus. Uh, now, the big change here is that there is a moment, and if you watch like the original live stream of it, it's implied that Cersei is about to stab Odysseus at the end of the song, right? That she has gotten his guard down and had grabbed the knife from him and is about to stab him. But then Odysseus turns away and says, I can't. And he says, my wife waits for me, she's everything, my Penelope, and I can't do it, right? So he begs for mercy. And Cersei relents and lets his men go and gives him directions to the underworld, right? So big change here, right? Odysseus is not stuck on the island for a year. He leaves. It looks as if this entire thing took place over the course of like a few hours, right? Like
Hmm.
less than a day. And after this event, after all of this happens, Sir Odysseus does not sleep with Cersei. In fact, him not sleeping with Cersei is what convinces Cersei to help him, because I guess she realizes, oh, he's not like other guys.
He's not.
Uh, you mean you're not like the other guys?
I.
It's actually a very. I'm making fun of it, but I actually like the song. It's a pretty good song, even though I think the Cersei saga is the weakest of all of them. Personally, it was my personal least favorite. It's less because it wasn't good, and more because there weren't as many like earworms in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
So
Warrior of the Mind, I'll give it credit. It's pretty good. And also, Anthony, I want to tell you this. I just
yeah,
defeated all 5 Kell Dragons with my bare hands on Dark Forces hard mode.
I don't know what any of those words mean. None of them are in the Bible, but good job.
Thank you.
Uh,
That's all I wanted to hear from
None of those words are in the Bible, man. Anyway,
you.
anyway, so my the point of me going through all of that is that we get a very big change in Odysseus's character, and it's a very intentional change because Jorge has talked about it. Like he said, I tried to. He actually says like I'm trying to adapt it pretty accurately, right? Like not necessarily like obviously you got to compress events for an adaptation, change up the order of things a little bit, but include all of the stuff you want to hear in an Odyssey adaptation, right? You get the Cyclops, you get Cersei, you get even the Trojan horse in the very first song, which is not actually in the Odyssey, but is sort of mentioned in the Odyssey, right? He does some interesting things, like for example, Astyanax. He is a minor character in the Iliad. He is the son of Hector. Uh, he's a really fascinating character in the Iliad because it shows how Hector, even though he seems to understand that they're probably not going to win the war with the Greeks, he hasn't internalized it, right? That's kind of the point of the scenes with Astyanax. He he tells his wife, "Yeah, I'm probably going to die, and you're probably going to be sold into slavery." But then he picks up his son and says he's going to be an even better leader than me one day. it sort of shows that even though Hector may intellectually understand that things aren't going to end well, his heart hasn't entirely accepted it, right? Uh, Famously, in Greek mythology, this is not mentioned in the Iliad or the Odyssey, right? It's all like in later legends about these stories. Astyanax was supposedly dropped off the walls of Troy, right, and killed to make sure that he would not grow up and get revenge on the Greeks. It's a harrowing story, honestly. Like it's a really disturbing story to hear, but the epic the musical makes a really interesting decision that they have early on, uh, where Odysseus is the one who drops Astyanax off the wall. Uh, he gets a vision from Zeus who tells him, if you don't do this, this is the son of Prince Hector. He's going to grow into and he's going to kill you and your family, and you'll have no home to go to because they're all going to be murdered. So Odysseus has this choice now. As Zeus puts it, the blood on your hands is something you won't lose. All you can choose is whose. There's a beautiful ballad, in my opinion at least, the second song, Just a Man, where Odysseus soliloquies about making this decision, and it ends with him dropping Astyanax off the wall, and this haunts Odysseus throughout the rest of the musical. It comes up as a theme again and again. Uh, and all of this is in service to a theme that Jorge wanted to get across, which he calls ruthlessness. So, Ben, you said you heard this song, yes? Ben, can you hear me?
While I was fumbling for my mic, I died. I have to do it all over again. Yes, I've heard
I'm
it.
Okay. So this song is Ruthlessness. This is when this is something else Jorge changes, and he changed it for dramatic effect. Odysseus is Poseidon's enemy in the Odyssey. This is explicit, right? Because he
Hmm.
blinds Polyphemus, who's Poseidon's son. Therefore, Poseidon is out to get him. However, in the Odyssey, Odysseus never meets Poseidon face to face. Interestingly, even though he is
Hmm.
arguably the main antagonist of the Odyssey, right? Like he
Right.
causes all of the worst things that happen to Odysseus. They never actually see each other. Uh, in Epic, this has changed. Poseidon gets, in my opinion, one of the best songs in the entire thing, which is Ruthlessness, and this sets the theme of the entire story. The song goes, ruthlessness is mercy upon ourselves. The idea is that if you are not ruthless, then people are going to take advantage of you. And this is shown throughout the musical in various ways. If Odysseus had been ruthless and killed the Cyclops, as he was supposed to, then the Cyclops might have not been able to contact his father and get revenge. Of course, also, this wouldn't have happened if Odysseus decided to announce his name and address. But either way, this is also the reason that Athena leaves him. So Athena, again, just like in the Odyssey, Athena is like his patron god. Uh, they add a little backstory in this version. But one thing that they also add is a breakup scene. Literally a break, like that's the best way to describe it. It's like a breakup scene called My Goodbye. Uh, Ben, I don't know about you. I loved My Goodbye. It's one of my favorite songs in the whole thing. Uh, that's the Odysseus Athena breakup song,
Right.
where Athena leaves him, and the reason that she does this is because he didn't kill the Cyclops when she told him to, and
Reasonable.
yeah, it honestly kind of is like it's more even that he didn't. It's like he did it specifically to spite her. He then announced his name and his address, which was the dumbest thing he could do, and he kind of did it to spite her, right? Like, so she was pissed, reasonably, and she left. She was also being unreasonable in some ways, as Odysseus pointed out. She orders him to do all of these incredibly difficult things, but doesn't really take on any of the pain or responsibility herself. There's an implication that she shows up at the end of the Cyclops saga to tell him to kill the Cyclops, but which implies that she was there the entire time and didn't actually help. So, there's a few things here, right? A lot of power plays going on. This
Yes.
scene is in the original Odyssey. right? A theme, it's never there. But it sets up this theme of Odysseus should have been more ruthless, right?
Yeah.
And then Poseidon makes it explicit when he says ruthlessness is mercy upon ourselves. So if you had been more ruthless, then maybe your men would be doing better. Because ruthlessness in this world, in the world of the Greek myths, right? In
Mm-hmm.
the ancient world, ruthlessness is mercy. And now all of your men are going to die because you should have been more ruthless. So this is where you get to, and that's why all of this stuff has been added. It's in service of this theme of ruthlessness. And I think the reason that he made Odysseus not be a cheater is because if you're going to go with a theme of Odysseus needs to be more ruthless if he wants to survive, you need to counterbalance that with why should we admire this guy, right? And
Mm.
you do that by saying, okay, well, because Odysseus is, despite whatever else he does, is always going to be incredibly faithful to Penelope and Telemachus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a very clever writing decision. So finally, you get to this is the part Ben did not hear, sadly. He wanted to make it very clear to me that it was not my fault, it was his.
It
He
was.
could have listened to it and did not. He told me to tell you all this.
I did. This is all
So,
entirely true and entirely my fault that I have no idea. What? Well, I mean, I know what's going on, but I don't have any idea what's going on story wise.
right. So you get to the Underworld saga. This again, they change a bit. They include a lot from the original, but they change a bit here. So, in the original Odysseus Journey to the Underworld, uh, it's honestly really weird to read in retrospect because it's very clearly added as sort of greatest hits of characters from the Iliad. Like, he gets to meet a bunch of the heroes who are otherwise you would never be able to meet because they're dead. But, the Odyssey is supposed to be a sequel, and everybody wants to know how everybody's doing, right?
They're all in
Uh,
hell. Sorry,
they
spoilers.
are. What's no the funny part is even in the text of the Odyssey, this is kind of true. Like he meets
It is.
Achilles and tries to cheer him up, and Achilles is like, "Don't even try, Odysseus. It sucks, and you know it." He's like, "I would literally rather spend an eternity or I would trade an eternity here for one day outside breaking my back as a slave. This is awful." So yeah, they're all in hell. Uh, Anyway, yeah, Odysseus, but it's a kind of a weird vibe, right? Like it's not really depressing, with the lone exception of when Odysseus meets his mother in the underworld. That's a horribly depressing scene. He meets her, he tries to embrace her 3 times, but she's a wisp. And Odysseus says something like, "What god is punishing me that you're here, but I can't embrace you?" And she reveals that things aren't going so great at home. You know, like
Yeah.
they could be worse, but they definitely could be better. It's like, Telemachus is alive and Penelope is alive, but there are men living in your house, and your father is not doing great, and also I'm dead. Uh, so not great news. In the original Odyssey, he finds Tiresias. Tiresias, believe it or not, gives him a series of extremely clear and helpful prophecies. It's kind of weird how specific and helpful they are. They tell him, hey, just so you know, you're going to find cattle sacred to Hyperion. All you have to do is not eat the cattle, and you'll all be fine. You'll get back to your land. The suitors will be there, but you have every chance of clearing them out. And you might die. And as long as you do everything I tell you and appease Poseidon correctly, then you'll die of old age. And Odysseus goes, okay, you know what? Honestly, that's not that bad. It's like I was expecting worse. Thank you, Tiresias. Then his men promptly eat the sacred cattle of Helios, and they all die. Uh, or Hyperion, I'm sorry. And then they all die.
Yep.
It's really stupid.
Oh yeah.
I'm not. I'm not criticizing the story. I mean, his men were very stupid. Uh,
You have to
they are
understand
characterized.
this is
Yeah,
like Tiresias has been giving prophecies all his life. He has a couple of really cool stories, well, weird stories about him, including being turned into a woman by Hera or something. But essentially, all his
yeah,
life
she
he's
would
been
do that.
giving. Yeah, she would. Uh, all to figure out who has more sexual pleasure, the man or the woman. And he goes the woman, and then she curses him again. Uh, it's a wild story. Uh, Oh no, she turns him blind. That's what she does.
Oh,
Uh,
that's how he got blind. That's amazing, and I wish I knew that story.
the
I'm
other
looking this
one
up.
is he might have seen two snakes having sex, and that's apparently a huge no-no, a chthonic revelation, in fact. Um, but yeah, no. It's like all his life he's been giving prophecies and dealing with the gods, and he's like, finally, I can tell the truth about what's going to happen, and it's going to be entirely accurate and completely understandable. And then it doesn't matter. It's an undersung
Yeah,
irony.
yeah. To be clear, like I'm not criticizing the story when I call them stupid. His men are very consistently characterized as stupid.
Yes,
It's probably their most consistent character trait is that they're morons. Uh,
yes. This isn't even subtext. It's just text.
Once again, though, you got to be kind of careful with this because remember, it's Odysseus telling who just so happens to be the only survivor. What a coincidence!
If only they had
And who is
listened to me.
yes, exactly, and who just so happens to be the only survivor, and is also a known and famous liar, telling this story in the first person, right? Like, did this really happen? Mm, I don't
Hmm.
know. It's kind of like the Cersei. Honestly, the Cersei story is really what makes me question it the most. Because as somebody pointed out, in their like, hey, the Cersei story, the crew is weirdly less like dumb than they are in other parts of it. Like the fact that they had to
Right.
convince Odysseus to leave, and the fact that Odysseus clearly did not want to leave for a full year. Like it seems like Odysseus kind of slipped up here a little bit, right? Like maybe he revealed a little bit too much of this of the truth in this story. Uh because it makes him look a little worse and the crew look a little better. And normally Odysseus doesn't like doing that. He likes to make himself look good and he
Yep.
likes to make the crew look bad. Uh but there are a couple moments like this, like just a couple. The other is at the end of the fight with the Cyclops, when Odysseus is yelling at the Cyclops, and his men are. It's actually like unintentionally, I think, really funny. His men are literally begging him, "Please, please, Odysseus, don't antagonize the Cyclops. We have left. We're so close." And Odysseus is just like, "But I was." My translation literally says the words, "But I was really angry." And he's just like, and my hero's heart could not be quieted. So I yelled my name, and it was a mistake.
My men are
And
not the fault this time. I'm taking the L. I should have listened to my boys who have been with me for 10 years.
yes, it's actually like probably unintentionally, but I don't know if it's entirely unintentional because I don't want to be unfair to Homer or anything because he actually does include humor in his stories that is
Yes.
clearly intentional sometimes. So it's possible this was meant to be at least somewhat funny. Uh, but I don't think so. I think it was just meant to be a dramatic scene. Like
Well, yeah, the
it's
scene itself
literally
was dramatic, but how he tells it is like a little bit of irony.
yeah. The thing is, like this moment and the Cersei moment are pretty much the only moments where he makes the crew not look bad. But they tell a bit of a story to me of like, huh, like the with the same crew that did this, also just completely, you know, forget about really obvious things later. It makes you wonder. Anyway, so that's the original Odyssey version of events. So how does Epic the Musical change it? First off, I'm gonna say like Ben hasn't listened to it. I absolutely love the Underworld saga. It is my second favorite to the Cyclops saga. We will talk more about the individual stuff and Ben's opinions because I forced him to listen to a bunch of it. Uh,
It's me. It's my
at,
opinions. It's what
yes,
everyone comes here for.
at gunpoint. Anyway, no. To which Ben's response was, "You really think that that would affect my opinions?" And I go, and I'm I'm gonna keep going.
I
So
have said some things to people with guns on me. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. The threat of violence means literally nothing to my self-preservation.
by the way, for the record, if you think you're streaming a game, I just noticed because I just unpaused it the video, it says
Yeah.
looking for a game to capture.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think you've been streaming the game. Oh well. Anyway, while you figure that out, I'll tell the story that they as they have it in the Underworld saga. So the Underworld saga starts off with Odysseus going, Circe's instructions are clear. No matter what we hear, full speed ahead until we find the prophet. So it's implied that they're going to hear some things in the underworld. Uh, they enter the underworld. It's not clear exactly how they do it. There are a lot of animatics that people make of Epic the Musical. My favorite version of this story is the animatic where he grabbed like a jewel, where he was given a jewel from Circe, and when he activated the jewel, it flipped the ship under the water, and now they're in the underworld. It was a very cool image, but this is all like artistic imagination. So they're in the underworld,
I mean,
and
that's pretty
Odysseus.
cool though.
It is. Uh, I'll try and show you the link to that particular one if I can find it. But anyway, he says, all I hear are screams every time I dare to close my eyes, right? I no longer dream, only nightmares of those who died. There's nothing's what it seems. In the underworld, the past is close behind. This land confuses your mind. So we're set up here. The underworld, you got to go full speed ahead because if you don't, you're going to be distracted by these visions and mists from your past that are causing him nightmares. And Odysseus has a line where he says, I keep thinking of the infant from that night. The first person who shows up is his friend Pylades. Pylades in the original Odyssey and Iliad is an extremely minor character. Like, literally, he's mentioned in passing. He's just like a member of the crew, right? They expand his role in Epic the Musical to represent like the alternate philosophy to what Odysseus is ultimately forced to embrace. So this philosophy of open arms. He gets a song called Open Arms. This is where he believes that you need to lead with trust and understanding, and in turn, you'll be rewarded for it. So he dies. Uh, Obviously. Because in ancient Greece, that's a really dumb idea. Uh, he was he's portrayed as Odysseus' childhood friend. There's a cut song where you learn that they like grew up together. Incidentally, I know why they cut the song, and I'm glad they did because even though it's not a bad song, it's very obviously a love song. And even if you are in favor of like gay shipping or whatever, Odysseus needs to be very much in love with Penelope for the story to work.
Yep.
So like they absolutely did the right thing cutting it. But anyway, he meets Pylades, who reminds him of this philosophy, and then fades away. And then he sees a vision of his mother, who, by the way, is portrayed by Jorge's mother. Uh, and all she says is that she was waiting, and this is implied to be the last words that she was thinking before she died. Uh, and Odysseus has a line where he says, "I've took too long and adventured too far," and she fades away. So now you can see these are the regrets that Odysseus had. He lost his best friend, and he's realized that because of the mistakes he made, he also lost his mother. And then the chorus comes back in, and he goes, all I hear are screams. And finally, he reaches the prophet Tiresias. So this is where things significantly diverge. Uh, yeah, we've cut out some of the meetings with some of the characters from the Iliad in favor of characters who had a big role in Epic, but that's all like, okay, he did meet his mother, like, he did travel through the underworld, whatever, right? Uh, Tiresias is a big change, though. So remember, in the original Odyssey, Tiresias was actually quite helpful, right? Like, he gave Odysseus real advice, and even told him, like, there's some hope for you. Like, if you do what I say, you might die of old age, right? Like, he and Odysseus responds with like, honestly, I could have really gotten worse news. Thank you for the help. That is not what Tiresias tells Odysseus here. First off, this is a brilliantly written prophecy with just the right amount of ambiguity to work. Tiresias tells him, there is a world where I help you get home, but that's not the world I know. I like to think that this is a reference to the original Odyssey, because that would be really cool if it was. Uh, okay, we have this reference. The world where he helps you get home is a reference to the original Odyssey, right? But that's not the world I know. And then he says, he gives his prophecy, and his prophecy is in line with more like what you would expect from prophecies, in that there is a lot of vague language that could be taken to mean multiple things and is not very helpful. Right? I see a song of cast romance, sacrifice of man. He says portrayals of betrayal, and a brother's final stand. And then he says, in the most notable part, which I really like, I see you on the brink of death. I see you draw your final breath. I see a man who gets to make it home alive, but it's no longer you. Okay. So obviously Odysseus does make it home alive. He does. Like, one thing you got to know too about this is that Jorge has released a lot of the later songs already, or at least clips of them, and a few of them even in full, just like when you combine clips together, which fans have done. So we know how this ends, like even in the epic version, right? Odysseus does make it home. Like, it happens as it happens in the Odyssey. He fights off the suitors. He meets Penelope, right?
Mm.
So what does all of this mean, right? Well, the the general consensus is that when he says, I see a man who gets to make it home alive, but it's no longer you, it's that Odysseus has changed so much, he is not the same person, right?
Mm.
But Odysseus doesn't know that. And then he gives another piece of the prophecy. I see your palace covered in red, with faces of men who have long believed you're dead, and I see your wife with a man who is haunting, a man with a trail of bodies. Now, this could be a reference to either Antinous, who is the head of the suitors in the original Odyssey and in Epic. Uh, he gets a great villain song in Epic where he threatens to chop Telemachus into little pieces and throw him in the ocean, and then gang rape Penelope. It's great. Uh, it's very hateable. Anyway, so this could be a reference to Telemachus, or the more interesting interpretation is that this is a reference to Odysseus himself. The man who is haunted with a trail of bodies, like, could refer to Odysseus. The
Mm.
neat thing about the prophecies is that they can refer to multiple things. We know that Eurylochus mutinies against him. We know this because of like snippets of songs that Jorge has released. This is not in the Odyssey, by the way, except in the fact that Odysseus is just like a little bitch in the Odyssey, and Odysseus never really liked him. Uh, but in Epic, he mutinies against Odysseus. Uh, yeah, I see the sacrifice of man. It could refer to what's already happened with the Cyclops, or with Poseidon killing them in the storm, or it could be referring to what happens with the cattle of Hyperion. Now, I have a prediction over where I think the story will go based on the clips that have been released. So the next saga is called the Thunder Saga. We only have about 4 minutes of songs from this saga, at least as fans have compiled separately. The rumor is that this is going to be coming out in June. The clips we have are of Scylla, so this is when Odysseus has to get through the monster Scylla, which is like a tentacled monster that uh, rips men from their boats and throws them into the ocean, to my recollection.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a bit of this song, and then we have the song Mutiny, which Eurylochus decides to mutiny because he believes that Odysseus did not do enough to fight Scylla, so he mutinies. And then we have a song which is one of my favorites that I'm looking forward to the full version being released, Thunderbringer, which is Zeus's song. Uh, and that's all we get of the Thunder Saga. My prediction is that after the mutiny song, when he defeats Eurylochus, his men are going to eat the cattle of Hyperion, and then Zeus is going to show up, and he's going to do his little thing, the Thunderbringer song. He has a line in the song where he says, "King of Ithaca, why do if I were to make you choose between the lives of your men and crew or your own, why do I think they'd lose?" So I think what's going to happen is he's going to go, "You guys ate the cattle of Hyperion, so you're all going to have to die." And Odysseus is going to say, "Hold on, before you do this, I would like to point out that I did not eat any of it."
I like it.
I think that's what he's going to do. I think he's gonna go like, wait, you're gonna kill my, I'm gonna have to kill all of you. And he's gonna go, hold on, before you start, I didn't do it. They did it, not me. And he's going to be banished to Ogygia with Calypso. Uh, so we'll see. I am very curious as to how this goes. So Ben, uh,
Eh, eh.
you you enjoyed Warrior of the Mind. You said
I
yes.
did
Would you say that's your favorite of the songs in Epic?
so far. I did like the clips of the Zeus song I heard. Uh, but yeah, so like I'm gonna say something right now. Unless we're talking about a musical that we're enjoying like this, like we're doing now, I do not really follow musicals. I have a very hard time following them. Partially because I'm all into the story and I mean, not the story, the song and the pageantry. But oftentimes, threads of logic just do not register in the brain pan like they do in stories. It's part of the reason why I consume so much media talking about media, is because I tend to get a bit more out of it than I do actually experiencing the thing. At least in the meta level, in the textual level.
Getcha.
So it's like I dig Warrior of the Mind a lot. Like one of the things that has always been very dramatic, when I came across it was the death of was it Anaximander? What was his name?
Which I don't know which character you mean.
Hector's kid. Uh,
Oh, Astyanax. Astyanax.
Astyanax.
Yep.
Astyanax. Like I've always had that dramatic idea. It's like because sometimes people depict it like, yeah, they threw him off the side. There are other depictions where Odysseus or Neoptolemus literally bashed the kid's head out against the wall on top of the walls. Uh,
That's
l-
disturbing.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and that was like the original interpretation I had in my brain when that happened because it was like, you know, dropping it like it just like they smashed him against the walls. Well, what do you think that means? Dropping him off the walls? No, it means they took, like ripped him from Andromache's hands and smashed him. Like it's in the brain pan, in the psyche. Uh, that sort of thing happened. And it struck me so much that that's one of the reasons why I had Hector and Pinkerton's ghosts outside the gates of Greek hell, basically waiting for his son forever because he was a babe and therefore innocent and therefore didn't die and go to Greek hell. Um, it's just one of those things. I liked it a lot. I liked Warrior of the Mind partly because it's how do I want to put it? Like it's not like the language is never clear, but it makes more sense to me as a duo because like the Polyphemus stuff is all right, but I just kind of hate the sound of Polyphemus, and I've always hated the sound that they did there because they've done it in other things how they grow the voice and make it more grand for a monster. It's it's hard for me to kind of enjoy it because there's always a part of me that goes, that is a uh, monster
A
talking,
voice changer.
a
Yeah.
voice changer. Yeah. So
It makes me sad though because I love the Cyclops changer and I think his voice sounds very cool
I
in it.
like I like the music behind it. It was just like I was like ooh ooh, and then I heard the voice and I was like uh, which is a
I also
pity.
think Remember Them is probably my favorite song
Mm.
in my personal ranking. Mostly because of the end. The ending is like I think a chills moment when Athena shows up and says, "Have you forgotten the lessons I've taught you? He's
Oh
still a
yeah,
threat." And then
Athena.
Odysseus gives his speech.
Yes,
hmm
it was.
I think the speech is great. In some ways, I would say it's actually more satisfying than the original Odyssey because you kind of get the motivation. This might be because of a cultural difference, because Odysseus says in the original, like, I did it because my hero's heart made me. And it comes across to modern readers maybe as just very dumb,
Yeah.
right? Like, and it might be a cultural difference because it might be like that the ancient readers read that and went, yeah, Odysseus needs to preserve his honor, right?
Yep.
Like, of course he did that. But to me, it's like, really though, your men were begging you, and it clearly backfired. But in the epic version, and again, I think this might just be Like, I think the change was good because we are in a different culture. So a cultural difference isn't necessarily bad, right? Like, changing the meaning of it to fit with how we would understand it. It's more clear to me why Odysseus did it,
Yes.
right? Like, he says, literally Athena tells him to. You totally get the motivations here, which is that, okay, Odysseus is clearly kind of offended that Athena showed up now, right? Like, this implies that she was there the whole time and literally gave no advice up until the
Mm-hmm.
part after Polyphemus was killed. So it's
Right.
like, really, you couldn't have come at any other point. You only showed up to berate me, right? Like, so
Yeah.
that's part of it. The other part too is that his friend Collides just died, right?
Yeah.
Collides is the guy who says you should show mercy,
Yeah.
right? And Athena is telling him, "Hey, you shouldn't listen to that philosophy," and that's where Odysseus goes, like, "What good would killing do?" What's interesting about the scene is that, like, for a modern audience, I feel like you hear Odysseus's logic and you go, "Yeah, that all tracks," right? Like, it's even kind of Christian. The way he words it is, "What good would killing do when mercy is a skill that more of our world can learn to use?" My friend
Yeah.
is dead, my foe is blind, right? Like, basically, all of this bloodshed has already happened. Why should I cause more? And
Yeah.
that's something I think that modern listeners hear and go, yeah, I totally think that makes sense. And yet, in the ancient world, this is clearly wrong.
Yep.
Like, in the universe of Epic the Musical, at least, like, leaving your enemies alive is just giving them an opportunity to hurt you later.
Yep.
That's why you say, like, ruthlessness is mercy. So I think it's a really interesting and clever decision by Jorge. And that really sets up, like, the breakup scene that follows in My Goodbye, where Athena criticizes Odysseus and Odysseus criticizes Athena. And his criticism basically amounts to, you act like you're above it all, and yet you take an interest in me. What do you want out of this? At least I know what I'm doing, but you don't seem to be interested in doing anything except, like, criticizing me, right? But I have to deal with all of the dead bodies, that are left behind. You don't have to deal with them. You're a goddess, right?
Yep.
Like, it's very well done, and it's set up in the song that you enjoyed, which is Warrior of the Mind.
Yep. I enjoyed it. Like there's a certain amount of yeah, kind of modern talk, but quite frankly, it's like one of the first things I ever wrote as a novel and published it was Sheik of Mars, which I wrote entirely in a antiquated Arabian Nights voice. I used explicit language and cadence choices that one would find in 1001 Nights. So it was in the reign of Harun al-Rashid, et cetera, et cetera. There's language that you would recognize immediately as that. So it's like even if you use like old language and old styles, you would not be able to communicate. In fact, when one of the things I ran into is when I wrote Sheik of Mars and I was describing sci-fi things, I was criticized by John C. Wright that this stuff wasn't, it didn't fit the language. It was jarring. It was a fly in the ointment because I had this language that was kept very, I was able to fulfill the promise of the language, but I wasn't able to do so in like when I had to describe nanotechnology, if you get me. So it's
Yep.
like it's hard to use antiquated linguistics as the trope is, and also describe something to people that they would understand. Um, and I'm not saying that people are dumb, which they are, but I'm saying that in this situation, his choices are correct and better, and how to like it
I
like
agree.
his language did not jar me out of what he was doing. The
So I
same as the
agree with the full
presentation.
context.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
I
even with
agree with the full context
well,
because I heard a clip of it,
mm,
right? And the clip, I was like, if the whole musical's written like this, it feels a little juvenile. As it
yeah,
turns out, it's not, right?
right,
Like, he uses, so the line that I'm referring to, that I thought in context is actually fine. Like you said, he says, "Well done, you lied to me. What's your name? You first, and maybe I'll do the same. Nice try, but two can play this game." And then Odysseus, who is a small child at this point, it's implied, says, "Nah, don't be modest. I know you're a goddess, so let's be honest. You are Athena, badass in the arena, badass, witty, and queen of the best strategies we've seen." Right?
Right.
the the idiom of calling her a badass and a queen of the strategies, I'm like, it's a very catchy beat, right?
Mm.
Which it is. It's pretty catchy. Uh, but I'm like, this language feels too modern. However, when I listen to the whole thing, I realize that Odysseus is talking like this because he's a kid. So the idea behind it is that, like, none of it's written in ancient language, and I think that that's objectively correct for the sort of
Yes.
storytelling that he's doing. He absolutely should not be using like faux Homeric language here. It would
Mm.
not work. Uh, but even then, it's like that seems a little bit juvenile. But that makes sense because in this case, he's literally a juvenile.
Yeah. I just liked it. I didn't even think about that part because I didn't care. I just liked it, Anthony.
Mm.
Mm.
No, it's a good song. I'm impressed. So the reason that I like Epic as much as I do, and I got really into it in the way that autists sometimes do. Am I autistic? Who knows? Uh,
Yes.
I'm not. Nobody diagnosed me. Anyway, but the reason I got
I
into Epic,
diagnosed
uh, what was that?
you. Nothing.
I'm gonna keep going. No,
Good.
the reason though that I got as into Epic as I did, there were I would say two main reasons for it. First is that after listening to, like, remember, he has released lots of clips of like later, and like basically we have enough to reconstruct the majority of what he's gonna do in the story, right? Some even full songs from later on, some really good songs. Like, I absolutely maybe my favorite song in the entire thing is the officially like unreleased. It's only been reconstructed in clips, right? But we got the full thing. It's The Challenge, which is Penelope's song. It might be my favorite song in the entire thing. If for no other reason than it is an incredibly accurate portrayal of like Penelope's role in the Odyssey, and I think it really gets to the heart of her character in a really, really compelling way. Uh, like, it's a great song. I recommend it. But anyway, the main reason is that, like, I realize that, wow, he actually is not concerned really about being woke or not woke or anything. He just is telling a story about the Odyssey, right? Like, when he explained his changes were never about, oh, I don't think that modern audience no, he was able to give like clear thematic reasons, right?
Yes.
Uh, Now, this is not to say, I'm not saying that Jorge Rivera Herans is like, secretly hashtag our guy. In fact, I am almost sure if like you question him about any random political issue, just sheer statistically, the fact that he is a theater guy and that Tumblr has not turned on him means that he is almost certainly left wing, right?
Yep.
Like that just is a fact. But this is what we mean when we go, like, somebody asked us once, one of our commenters, do you need to be left wing to produce good media? And our answer was no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, or I'm sorry, right wing is what I meant to say. Do you need to be right wing to produce and our answer was no. And the reason the answer is no is because what you need is a commitment to telling your story, right?
Yes.
Like this is what Hayao Miyazaki has. Hayao Miyazaki has a commitment, excuse me, to telling his story. This is why like he can create a movie like Porco Rosso, which is the only Miyazaki movie with an explicitly Christian philosophical point of view, right? Like, and however, speaking as Christians, right? Like, I could say he gets it pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Like, he does a pretty good job with it. If anything, if you really want to get specific, it's really a Catholic point of view.
It is.
Like, granted, he doesn't go into like he doesn't really say anything that any Christian wouldn't agree with, but the way there's like small nuances, right, to the way things are expressed I think the focus on guilt, judgment, heaven and hell, right? Like
Mm,
how he believes he's cursed for his sins. There's something very Catholic about like the expression of it. You know what I mean?
yes,
Uh,
I
but it's
agree.
very subtle.
You,
It's very subtle.
yeah, like there is how do I want to put it? Like Catholic modes, Catholic and Protestant modes of dealing with it, dealing with like guilt and whatnot. That I think are thematically, how do I put it? Because it's the water we swim in, we don't notice it. Like if I like, there's ways to examine it once you take yourself from the outside, like Anthony has, and
Mm,
myself has. You know, there's a difference between the Catholic and Protestant view of repentance. Porco Rosso kind of has to do something. He can't just decide to do something and things change. You know, he has to accomplish it. Whereas there's very much a Protestant view that's kind of a path with victory at the end, which is different. Like the like it's not as, how do I put it? Like it comes down to how like things like confession is viewed. You know, for the Protestant, we confess, at salvation, and then we confess as we go through our lives, but we don't necessarily confess to somebody. The battle is internal rather than external. But for the Catholic, there is an external motivation with their, confession of sin and repentance. Prayers, a pilgrimage, victory, whereas the Protestants' victory comes from the success in spiritual, rejuvenation.
mm.
The part of the victory for the Catholic, sorry, the victory for the Catholic is part of the spiritual rejuvenation explicitly, rather than a follow through from the event. It's
Yeah,
it,
I
it
would I would say that's a good, fair, like value neutral, right? Like without
mm,
criticism of either side, specifically way of putting it, right? Like
yes,
just that's something I could accept. And there's something. It's also like, to be clear here, this is less even about doctrine and more about modes of expression,
yes,
right? Like there's a doctrinal element, but even then, like this isn't doctrine itself.
right.
Like
It's a
it's
logic.
connected to it in some ways,
It's a
but it's
log.
more about
mm,
culture.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a logical extension of the doctrine, not the doctrine itself.
Yeah. So Porco Rosso is a really, it's an interesting example, right? Like, and
Mm,
it's very, like, to be clear, in this case, while I would argue and I would make the argument, Porco Rosso is absolutely explicit in its Christianity.
oh yeah.
Uh, like in at least two separate scenes, he is very explicit about it. When
Hmm.
they say grace, and Porco Rosso looks notably bothered by it,
Yep.
presumably because he does not feel himself worthy to like say the prayer, and Theo winks at him because she understands that he doesn't feel comfortable, and she's
Mm.
kind of making fun of him. Uh,
But those Italian
and
grandmothers will not eat without saying prayer. I'm just
yes,
saying, just try. Just
yeah,
try.
it's true. And later, of course, even more obviously, the scene where he describes him being turned into a pig, he
Mm.
uses very explicitly like religious metaphors and language to describe it, right? So,
Hmm.
and it's very explicit. I would not say like, I don't think there's anything in Porco Rosso necessarily that a Protestant would be like, oh, there's no, Christians can't experience this. It's just that the way it's being expressed, like, it's very subtle. But like Ben was talking about, if you know and you think about it from the outside and you kind of like go, why does this feel Catholic? Right?
Mm.
Like, it feels Catholic. And then you got to go, okay, but why? Why does it feel Catholic? Well, first off, this is like the most value neutral thing that it can be because Miyazaki is literally not Christian,
Yes.
right? Like, why is he doing it from a Catholic perspective? Because logically, given the place and time, Porco would probably be Catholic,
Yep.
right? Like, that's it.
Everyone
That's
involved is
why.
Catholic, except for the
Yeah,
American, who is Protestant, of course, Southern
yes.
Baptist,
Who is probably Protestant. Uh,
very Protestant.
yes. Um,
Hasn't missed a potluck
so
in his life.
Exactly. Uh, so you really need to explain, like, or like I should say, Miyazaki really, being an artist, he's like, okay, if I'm going to portray these Catholics, right, then I'm going to, do it from that perspective because Miyazaki, being an artist, realizes that religion affects the way you think about the world, right? You can't just
Mm-hmm.
ignore it and go, oh, well, this isn't a movie about Catholics, which it isn't, right? Porco Rosso is not a religious movie in any sense of the word. Uh, it simply isn't. It is a
Yep.
movie about sky pirates and dogfights, right?
Maybe
Uh,
survivor's guilt, just a little bit.
and survivor's guilt. Yes. However, Miyazaki, being an artist, a real artist, realizes that if you're going to portray this world, obviously religion affects the way that these characters would think.
Yep.
Their belief system will affect how they think. Therefore, you need to include it in some capacity, and you need to be accurate about it if you're going to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he does. Uh, so reconnecting this then to Epic the Musical and going like, all of this was to say that even though I am like 100% certain that Jorge is probably left leaning, probably like, I would be shocked if he was not. I'm pretty sure my sister looked it up and he did support some like, pro gay causes, which of course he did. He is in theater and they haven't turned on him. If you're
Yes.
in theater and they haven't turned on you, then yeah, that's, you know, pretty, and you have any success, I should add, right? Like, yeah,
Right.
you're going to be left leaning. So,
Yep.
but but when you look into like his process creating it, it is very clear that he is trying to make a good adaptation of the Odyssey. Like, that is his goal,
Yes.
to make a good adaptation of the Odyssey. When he explains his storytelling choices, he's never explained it in terms of I want to add more diversity, I want to be more feminist. He didn't even really ever say like I wanted to resonate more with modern audiences. He said there were certain themes I wanted to emphasize, so I made these changes in order to emphasize these themes, right? Like, which I think is an absolutely like a praiseworthy way of doing it. I think it's the way it should be done. Uh, that's how these things work, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you adapt a work, when you need to figure out, okay, what am I doing with this adaptation, right? Like, why am I adapting it? What point am I trying to make? And Jorge is very clear about the point he's trying to make. So that's one of the main reasons that I admire Epic so much, is that I really do get this impression that like I don't expect to be woke sucker punched by it, right?
Yes.
Now, if it
Penelope
ever
isn't going to be
expands,
a man.
yeah, if it ever expands, I would not necessarily count on that, right? Because the more hands get in the pot, the less control that the original creator has.
Yep.
And since the original creator is not right wing, he is not going to gatekeep it in the way that we would prefer,
Yep.
right? So once it goes out into the wider world, I would not be surprised if it ever gets a theatrical production. The theatrical production is very woke.
Yep.
Like, would not shock me at all. I mean,
Yep.
it also wouldn't shock me if he happens to be the director and it's fine, but like it could go
Yeah.
either way. Yeah.
Like at some
Uh
point, Cersei is going to be like a man in a dress or something.
yep. Like it just feels like the sort of thing that would happen. Uh but but
But
with all of that said, the other reason that I've been enjoying it as much is that as I have listened to more of it, I have realized the lyrics are really good.
yes.
Like, literally, as you listen to it, there are the lyric, his lyrical writing. Like, he is actually a fantastic lyricist.
Oh,
Like,
I'm kind of almost already looking forward to his next thing, just because it's like, oh, if he's going to do it like this, is he going to do an Iliad? Ooh, please. Probably not.
that would be pretty cool, but I don't expect it. Uh, who
The
knows?
hard part is actually finding a 9 foot tall man to play Ajax.
Yes. A 9 foot tall giant to play Ajax. I guess you could do it in a concept album and just put the guy on stilts as he sings. Wait, why do I need to be on stilts as I sing? This
It's
is very
important.
important for authenticity.
I am.
Because you don't understand. Look, this is my vision, and in my vision, Ajax is 9 feet tall. I cannot record this if you're not on the stilts.
I'm
Anyway,
an
uh,
artist, and I will not
yeah,
compromise.
I will not compromise my vision.
All right, that's it. It's interesting stuff because it's like there's a bit of a hullabaloo right now over like In Praise of Shadows, who's normally a pretty decent horror franchise reviewer. He basically went after conservative media and he saved his final point for Wendigoon, who is a good boy who could, turn into a genocidal dictator and then go, oh gosh, sorry, I didn't mean to do all that, and I'd forgive him right away. I could
I
be
would.
in the gulag. Oh gosh, sorry, I didn't realize the gulag was this bad. I'll reduce the beatings by half. Oh, thank you, man. I love you. You're great. Thank you. Um, but it's like he went after him and questioned whether he had like questioned his Cherokee heritage or whatever heritage that Wendigoon has. Questioned this, questioned that. He attacked it, and one of the things that sort of got on me is that you know there was he's the weak man in the good men create good times create weak men create hard times create good men. uh and it's like he's attacking his better for no other reason than personal vitriol because he's a conservative, and quite frankly, I think part of the reason the left keeps using conservative is because it's as good an attack as it is a descriptor. Because, as everyone knows, the conservatives have conserved nothing, but it's still a good way to attack people. And Wendigoon has been like, I'm sorry you didn't like it, but you still attacked me and you were incorrect on many different matters, etc., etc. Just because I listen to your YouTube channel doesn't mean I, have some effect on you or told people to attack you. That's ridiculous. Um, it's a good non-apology kind of thing. Um, Keeps him on the up and up as the good boy we all know he is. Uh, it's like, so let's say we create our own conservative art piece. you know this is the type of person who's going to attack it, and it won't get mainstream success because of like the Epic the Musical has. It's
No, it never will.
it never will, and it's like half the time it's, well, they approve things like Mr. Bertram, which nobody likes, not even the people who made it. Then you have other sort of things where like there's like half-assed westerns. There's this, there's that. There's kind of a
Right.
lack
The
of.
awful Daily, by the way, for the record here, I'm gonna just say this, it's inexcusable how bad most of the Daily Wire's
Yes.
media has been. They do not have an excuse for it. The excuse of, oh, they're a new studio, they're learning, that's bullshit, because
Yep.
because these things are made by people. You could hire people who know what they're doing. Like,
Yes.
the fact that you're a new studio, literally. And just as a good example of this, Angel Studios. Now, I'm not saying Angel Studios like, oh, they're flawless. They have no skeletons in the closet or whatever. But they are no more flawed than the Daily Wire, right?
Yep.
Like,
Well.
and they're putting out good material.
Yep.
Like, it could be done. They're also new. Yeah.
Yep.
So no, I don't excuse the Daily Wire. They have put out wretched material. Like, it's amazing that they've put out so few like half decent things. The
Oh
one
yeah.
thing I liked by them is What Is a Woman, which I do think is a good documentary. Uh, I think it's well made. I think it's entertaining. I think it makes a very important point. Whatever you think of Matt Walsh, and I know lots of people don't like him for reasons that range from completely valid and entirely logical to probably unfair. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
depending on who you talk to. But What Is a Woman is a good documentary. That's it. That is all they've made that I have found worthwhile.
Yeah.
And it's not fiction, by
And
the
it.
way, which is also notable. Like, and
Yeah.
it's not fiction.
There's some questions to it for me because like they picked up Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, and stuff like that from like an acting agency. Basically they hired their conservative talking heads, from acting agencies, and they can't find good actors except for like Gina Carano on occasion when the moon is right. So it's hard to like sort of justify them and defend them. I want to defend Friends. I like Epic the Musical for its own thing. I think Warrior of the Mind is great. I'm just not into musical theater the same way that Anthony is. Very suspicious, Anthony.
No, it's
Very
my
suspicious
it
indeed.
it's the one thing that I admit. It's like no, I agree. Enjoying musical theater is hashtag pretty gay.
Pretty gay.
However, you know what? I've just accepted that this thing about myself.
Oh, okay. So it's hard to defend them because what it means is that one, they're either not serious and therefore not friends, or they are actually enemies disguised as friends who are trying to hold back the any movements that might arise. The problem is that to get like art out there these days, and not just be an indie author of no renown. You do have to sort of gather this stuff up, gather friends and allies, have people who know what they're doing. Like the guys who are working on the Stalker movie, know what they're doing. Well, you still need six figures plus to you could probably hire them out for, six figures. And then, have them do whatever they want and they'll be happy to do it. But also, most of what they do is like, American military style horror, not necessarily, something that people might want to watch outside of the demographic. Because art is as much of an argument as is anything else. It's just that it's more subtle. I joked about Cersei being a dude in, some sort of musical theater, but what that does is that retroactively colors everything behind it. Uh, it doesn't leave it as it is. You can say, well, I can just ignore it. Well, no, the knowledge is out there. At some point, somebody said, yeah, this is accurate to the character and designation, and it'll make a political statement and so on and so forth. Furiosa, which just came out and I haven't seen and probably won't see to let it die the death, uh, is is focus is not may or may not be itself political, but it focuses on a character who was designed with political ideas in mind. Even though Fury Road is fantastic, I love all the explosions. Top 10 explosion tier list coming when. Uh, it's hard to sort of look at this stuff, especially stuff coming from like the Daily Wire and stuff like that, and go like, hey, can we do something? Can we make an Odyssey movie? Like they did with Amon Asante, or an Iliad movie, like they did with who
Brad
played it?
Pitt.
Brad Pitt. Um, was it Brad
See,
Pitt?
I never saw Troy in full, and the reason I never did is because I just heard from multiple people it wasn't very good. But I might be wrong though. Like it could have been one of those things where like the right
Oh, it is Brad
audience will
Pitt.
appreciate. Yeah, the right audience will appreciate it. I'm thinking of Troy.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Uh, yeah, and I did like Eric Bana as Hector. I like the look of him. And they had Orlando Bloom as Paris, which I think was. Sean Bean was Odysseus, by the way, Anthony.
Oh, that's an interesting choice. I like that.
I like that too.
Yeah, I heard like the thing about Troy is that every time I go, oh yeah, they made a movie about the Iliad, and then I look at like reviews and it's not supposed to have been that great, and then I go like,
It's good
but
meme
it
fodder.
yeah, but it is possible that like there's a certain audience that will really enjoy it, and I am part of, and I am part of that audience. So maybe it's worth a shot one day. Like I 300 to me, for example, is a really fascinating movie. Like honestly, it's a kind of a cultural like. First off, it's like you said, it's meme fodder.
Yeah.
It's one of the memeiest movies ever made. But uh, this is not an insult or a compliment. It merely is. It's part of the
Yes.
eternal now. Uh, but 300, and I don't think 300 is a bad movie. I think it's a pretty good movie, actually. Uh, but it's a fascinating movie from somebody who like knows the history of the 300 Spartans, because it is completely wrong, but it's always wrong in really interesting ways. Like, they portray all of the events that actually happened, and they portray all of those events, but they
Mm-hmm.
always portray them in almost the opposite of how they actually occurred. Like, it's wild. I don't even know how to describe it except like to use examples. Like, I think you know what I mean though,
I
right?
do. I do.
Like, the death of the messenger is the biggest one to me. Of like they kill the messenger. It's like this is like perfect example of what I mean by this event really happened. It happened if you gave a very basic description with no elaboration, it could sort of fit what we see on screen, right?
Yes.
But then you actually look into it and you realize that the point of this story to the Spartans is literally the exact opposite of the point they make in the movie, right?
Right.
Like the point of that story in the actual 300, like the way Herodotus told it, I guess I should say, right? The way Herodotus told it is that the Spartans were very honorable because they had committed a great sacrilege by killing a Persian messenger. This was not a badass moment. This
Mm.
was like a mistake. You know, they should not have done it. However, they preserve their honor, and this is supposed to show the commitment the Spartans have to preserving their honor, right? Like, they're so committed to preserving their honor that they send two men to Xerxes with apologies, along with like a promise from Leonidas that he can kill those men with no repercussions in, as a trade for killing the messenger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Spartan honor is preserved. And Xerxes, in response, is so impressed by this, he lets them both live. So the story has two purposes. First, the Spartans are very committed to honor. If they do commit dishonor, they are so committed to honor that they will literally die in order to make sure that it's preserved, right? Like, that's point number one of this story. Point number two of this story is that Xerxes is an honorable opponent, right? He is a worthy opponent. Uh, that he is not a monster. He is somebody who they can who he is a villain that they can respect, right?
Right.
Like, you're supposed to look at the story and go like, I don't want Xerxes to win, right? Like, I want him to lose. But if we do lose to him, we have lost to an opponent who understands our side of the story, kind of, right? Like,
Mm.
he is a worthy opponent for us to fight. And 300 is like the exact opposite of this. Like, Xerxes is shown as like some sort of like inhuman monster, which is not how he was viewed. Again, he was viewed as like he was a worthy foe. Like, they're gonna fight him, and maybe they'll win or maybe they'll lose. But either way, to beat him is to have beaten an opponent who you can be proud of, right? Of defeating. And if you lose to, there is no shame in losing to Xerxes, right? Like, he's not an opponent who you should be ashamed of losing to. And the second point of the story is not, oh, the Spartans are so badass that they murder messengers. Like, no, in no point in human history is it ever okay to kill a messenger. Peter Jackson, take notice of this. Uh, Not even to the Spartans. In
Yep.
fact, to the Spartans, it was especially bad because the Spartans were the most concerned with honor of all of the Greek societies. They're so concerned with honor that after a breach of honor, they are willing to literally sacrifice men to preserve their society's honor. Like, that is the point of this story. So 300 is really fascinating because it does this over and over and over again, where like things happen that technically sort of happened, but in exactly the opposite way of the way that the movie portrays it. Like, honestly, it's like worth a whole freaking analysis video. Maybe I'll do that one day. I have nothing else to add. I'm waiting on you, Ben.
Sorry, what was that?
I said it's worth an analysis video. Maybe I'll do that one day.
Oh yeah, I'm always down for more Anthony content. Don't you
Woohoo!
worry.
Eh. But yeah, that's that. Those were my main things with Epic. Like musically, it's also very well done. And if you listen to people who do analysis of it who know music theory, you'll notice that there's actually a lot of musical complexity in Epic. Like the fact that he associates characters with various instruments, and the way that Disney, and I mean ye old Disney, right? Like 1930s
Yes.
Disney, the way that he used to do in like the Three Little Pigs, right? You associate a character with an instrument.
Yeah,
I think
Peter and the
Athena.
Wolf.
Yep, exactly. That was it. Not Three Little Pigs. Peter and the Wolf, but
Do,
Athena
do,
gets a piano.
do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Athena gets a piano, Odysseus gets a guitar, and then when Odysseus has a really good idea, he gets an electric guitar,
Ooh.
uh, which is pretty cool. Uh, Calypso, when we didn't reach her yet, but one of her songs was released, and we get snippets of others. Calypso gets steel pans. Uh, I would think
Ah!
she would get a calypso drum, but the consensus seems to be that her instrument is steel pans. Uh, Aeolus, when you hear her song, she has the song "Keep Your Friends Close." She, of course, gets an Aeolian harp as her signature instrument. Uh, as well as obviously she should. And Eurylochus gets them. Zeus gets. I can't remember what Zeus gets. You hear it first in the first song, "The Horse and the Infant," when Zeus shows up. But I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But yeah, all of the characters get their own instruments and their own musical styles. Hades gets this cool synth '80s thing going on. Uh,
I look forward to that. I need to watch it, since apparently there's a 80s synth going on here.
so look up if you're looking for the one that's even more '80s. "Wouldn't You Like" is decent. It's not my favorite song. I think the Circe Saga is my personal least favorite. It has the least memorable music to me. But he has a later song where most of it has been released already, so you could find like compilation versions of it. Called "Dangerous," and that's Hermes telling Odysseus what to do when he gets off the island. Of Ogygia, when he goes, "You're setting me free," and he goes, "Wait a minute, why are you only telling me this now?" And then he goes, "Well, it's a little bit dangerous, my friend." It's very '80s, uh, very synth rock, and very in character. Also, not I don't think you're a big enough fan, but I'll say this for people in case someone's listening who is interested in trying it. Not that I think we've like gotten anyone tonight, but oh well. Uh,
Yeah.
one day, maybe one day. Uh, Also, if you're for people who are interested and have heard it and might want to check it out, I recommend watching animatics of it. Epic, for whatever reason, I have no idea why or how it developed this way, but it has a massive community of like animators that
Well,
follow it.
they did it for Hamilton.
Yeah, I guess it's just a musical theater thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Like
I don't know.
the animatics for Hamilton, there were many of them, and they were pretty good. Uh,
Yeah, Epic has some superb animatics. The big ones, Gigi has a lot. Uh, Literally, this is the name of the YouTuber, like GIGI. Her animatic of Monster, the final song of the Underworld saga, is like maybe the best of all of them. It's brilliant. Uh, Anna Flama's animatic, and again, like it's very silly, but that is actually the name of the YouTuber. She has an animatic of ruthlessness that turns Poseidon into like a demonic looking horse, which is a great idea, which
yes.
sounds sarcastic, but is actually not. Like, it is completely non sarcastically. That is a great idea because people often forget that he is the god of horses, and that's a fantastic motif to use for a villainous Poseidon. Is like this
Uh,
demonic horse thing, uh, especially because
Behold, and he's just this giant horse.
yeah,
It's like,
and especially because in the Odyssey he is actually referred to a couple of times in my translation as blue maned Poseidon. Like they literally use like the horse descriptor to describe Poseidon, you know. So it fits very, very well. Uh, Wolfie the Witch has a couple of really, really good animatics. Particularly, she did like the entire Cyclops saga, I believe. Uh, yeah, and Gigi's version of "Keep Your Friends Close" is also excellent. That's the song. I don't know if you listened to the whole Ocean Saga. I think you mentioned you skipped a couple songs.
No, I
So,
read it. It's just that I didn't feel strongly towards it.
okay, fair enough. Uh, yeah, the song "Keep Your Friends Close." Gigi has I believe it's Gigi who has a really, really good animatic of it. Gigi's tend to be the best because she uses actual like animation. I know that that sounds weird to say, but remember with animatics, you're talking about like still frames most of the
Yep.
time. And it's still mostly still frames, don't get me wrong. Like it's a single person, of course it is. But there are moments in hers, I think more than others, where she will use actual animation, which adds a lot. So I would recommend hers. This is for people who have heard it and what we're talking about and are maybe more interested in it and want to check it out. I recommend watching it with the animatics. It does add to the storytelling, right? Like
Yeah, it
remember,
does.
this is designed to be seen as well. Like Jorge has been very open about the fact that his ultimate goal is to get this produced as a stage play. Uh, so seeing it with visuals does help,
Mm.
right? Like there are even parts of certain songs where when you watch like the original live stream, Jorge makes it clear that stuff is happening on stage, quote unquote, that isn't actually in the song, right? Like in the Cersei saga when they're fighting each other. Like you only know this if you watch the original live stream and then it kind of made its way around the epic community.
Mm-hmm.
But like Odysseus summons a Cyclops to fight a chimera that's summoned by Cersei, and Cersei nearly stabs Odysseus and then drops the knife when Odysseus mentions Penelope. None of this is in the music. Like it pretty much can't be portrayed in the music.
Yeah.
There's really no way to do it. But he mentions this, and then you can include it in the animatics, which is one useful reason to have them. Uh, yeah, I guess we're getting towards the end here, so I'll end it with this. Lyrically, I am very, very impressed with Epic the Musical. Musically, it's also very good, but I am a writer, not a musician, so I don't know as much about the music. I do know about writing, and lyrically, I can say that like he's actually a brilliant lyricist. Some of one way a key tell of if someone is really doing a good job in writing is their foreshadowing, right?
Yes.
This is like you'd be surprised. This is actually one of script the guy who does the script shadow blog. I don't know if he's still doing it because I heard he was going to end it. He might be done now, but the guy who did the script shadow job used to mention this. Setups and payoffs and foreshadowing are tells, right, for a
Mm-hmm.
good script. And Epic the Musical is absolutely stuffed with these. It has so many callbacks to earlier things. If you actually pay attention to it over and over and over again, musical motifs, lines, like the ruthlessness line, the very first song when he goes, like the ending of Monster is honestly the Act One ending. Odysseus ends the song with, "And if I have to drop another infant from a wall in an instant, so we all don't die, then I'll become the monster." Literally calling back to the very first song, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
very well written. So for that reason alone, I enjoyed it. I
Yeah.
think that people will enjoy. I think that people who watch it will may enjoy it. Ben and I have slightly different musical tastes. There's overlap, but it's not identical. The overlap is most gloriously represented in the New Albion Radio Hour, a beautiful marriage of musical tastes.
It is. And then we look
Uh,
at things like, Ben, what do you like? And it's like New Albion Radio Hour. Uh, what's another music? Do I even like any other musicals?
yeah, Repo the Genetic Opera.
Hold on, I was gonna build up to that. And then it's
Oh,
like
I'm sorry.
Goofy Movie, and then like the last one's like
Goofy movie's
Repo
great.
Genetic Opera, and then it's like Ben.
Yeah.
One of these things is not like the other, and one of these things is very disturbing.
Goofy movie's also great though.
One
Uh,
time I went like, yeah, because I went to a concert where someone played The
Powerline song.
yeah, the Powerline song, and everyone looked at me funny, and I was like, "This is awkward. I don't like this." Like even the
There,
person who referenced the Powerline song looked at me funny, and I
so
was
there
like,
was an old YouTube channel. It's now old, sadly, because the dude who did it like just stopped at one point randomly in
mm.
like the past year. Sideways, uh, and he
"Oh yeah,
used
yeah,
to review music and movies, and he had a video on the Goofy movie where he's like completely unironically, a Goofy movie is literally like one of the best movies of the Disney Renaissance. He's like, I'm not kidding, I'm not memeing you, I'm actually being serious. And he like did an entire musical analysis of the Goofy movie that was actually extremely good. I recommend that video.
yeah, yeah."
Epic
Sideways, from
Sideways.
what I understand from
Yeah.
Sideways, is he got too many copyright strikes, and it just wasn't worth it anymore.
That's sad. His
Yeah,
last video was on cats, and it was also quite good.
it
Uh,
was. Oh well,
I mix sideways. He had very high quality stuff. But anyway,
yeah,
that's neither here nor there. Point is, if you like, like I said, Ben and I have slightly different styles. The marriage of them is in the New Albion Radio Hour, which is a thing that we both very much enjoy. Epic is more on my side of it. I really
yeah,
enjoy Epic the musical. Uh, I think we did discuss Repo once, but it was like a long time ago. So if you want
it
to do that
was.
again as a follow up,
Well,
we could do
I
it.
don't need to. Like it's like the thing with Repo the Genetic Opera. It's like what interests does this overlap for me? Good music, sure, yeah, but also like hammy characters, over the top set design, like like a dedication to the bit. Like there's reasons to really love Repo the Genetic Opera, but then it's like, oh yeah, Paris Hilton is in it. There's all kinds of weird incestuous subtones for the villains, and then also there's like abortive teenage rebellion, and I don't mean abortion. I mean like abortive, like as in like they're trying to do it, but in reality, there's like, how do I want to put it? Like the dad is actually poisoning her, and then other people are trying to poison against the dad, but he's doing a fine job of it to himself. So it's not like everything's great. It's like, oh, it's complicated. It's got a good flavor to it. But now that you've put the image in my mind of Hermes flying around with a keytar distributing party drugs, I'm down. Epic the Musical is 10 out of 10. Uh, I got no criticisms. I also
No,
want to try
it's
the Heavenly Molly.
yes, it's legit the holy moly.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
as they actually call it in the song. Uh, no, it's very good.
Mm,
It is literally was one of those things though that was kind of tailor made for like me specifically to enjoy. Uh, like I like musicals. I love Greek mythology. This is one of those things where it's like I grew up as a Percy Jackson kid, but I was one of the weird ones who did not get into Greek mythology because of Percy Jackson, but the other way around. I read Percy Jackson because I had already like been reading up on Greek mythology and was
okay.
already a fan of it. Right? Like
Yes.
I was like the kid who read the book and go, "Hey, that's not what the gods are like." You know.
There's
Uh
actually something I didn't talk about that I let go. Like the fact that he gave up immortality for Penelope is like super touching, because the goal for every Greek was to become immortal, a god, and it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of touching actually.
It is very no. It's a legitimately touching thing. One thing, like I'm in the middle of reading the Odyssey, and I just read the Iliad, and it's worth talking about because, like, one thing about the Iliad that was like, I know it sounds weird to say because it's like, oh, the Iliad's good, news at 11, right?
Right.
Like, literally the coldest take in the history of literature. Uh, it's like, what's next? The Epic of Gilgamesh, worth reading. Uh, no, but like, legitimately, what kind of surprised me about it was good in a way that almost felt modern, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
the reason that we think things are good, the Iliad is good kind of for the same reasons, right?
Yeah.
And there are like clear attempts at things that you kind of don't like associate with Greek epics, like jokes and humor, cliffhangers, dramatic moments like that, right?
Yep.
And one thing about the Iliad is that the ending of the Iliad is really, really touching. Like, I was very moved by the ending of the Iliad, unironically, when Achilles and Priam are together. The writing, and it's just something of like, the writing in this scene is so good, right? Like,
Mm.
I know, again, it sounds weird to say about Homer. It's like, no, like, I mean this in a very specific way of like, this feels like how actual people would react in this moment. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's the way that Homer describes it of that Hector and, or Priam, sorry, and Achilles are weeping together, and it's but he's very specific. He says like Achilles is weeping about Patroclus, and Priam is weeping about his dead sons, right? And they
Mm.
have this moment where they're doing this together, you know, but not for the same things, right?
Right.
Like it felt very real that they have found this moment of common ground by looking at the losses that they've suffered, but they're not the same losses. They're not weeping over the generic harshness of war, right? They're weeping over the deaths of their loved ones,
Yes.
right? Like it's a very moving scene, and it's also like, I saw a live performance of the Iliad called An Iliad, and they portrayed the Iliad in after reading it, they probably portrayed it as a little bit more anti-war than it was. I don't agree that the Iliad is entirely not anti-war. I think there are elements there in it, but I
Mm.
don't think it's fair to say that it's an entirely anti-war piece. I think it's much more complex than that,
Yes.
right? One of the interesting things about it is that the rage of they describe like that Greeks died because of the rage of Achilles. The thing about the rage of Achilles though is that it's described as meaning two different things. First, and the more obvious one, is it's the rage that let loose after the death of Patroclus, right? And the
Yes.
narrative does refer to it as rage, right? Like that he's so enraged, he's killing all these people. But it's also the rage that led him to not fight, right? Like
Mm.
it's not just the rage that led him to kill those people. It's also like Achilles was so angry that he didn't fight, right?
Right.
And a bunch of Greeks died because Achilles wasn't there to like defend them, basically, right?
Right.
So, like his rage that killed a lot of Greeks is like both of these things. It's not just one or the other, which I think is a very it's like a very complex writing technique, right?
Yep.
Uh the complexity of it is like it's not as simple as saying, well, if there was no war, none of these people would die. And yet, it's not as simple as saying that the war wasn't the cause of this either. Like Homer is not taking the easy way out here, I think, is the way that I would describe it.
Yeah.
And it's also true, like you said in the Odyssey, when Odysseus gives up immortality to be with Penelope, this is sometimes lost on people, and it's also like it's the Hercules salute. They literally use this all the time now. It's become a meme, right? Like Disney's Hercules used it. Percy Jackson also used it. Uh, and literally, my reaction reading this ending of Percy Jackson was like, didn't they take this from Hercules? Uh, and I was wrong. They took it from the Odyssey. Uh, but you're right. Like it's actually a very moving moment. There are a lot of moving moments in the Odyssey, honestly.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that like I don't think people realize like no, it actually like it really works, right? As a story in
Yep.
ways you don't expect, right? Like Odysseus giving up immortality because of Penelope and like brooding on the beach each day. Like this is a really moving thing that he's doing.
Yeah.
It's very touching. And the scene where he tries to embrace his mother and he's in despair because he's like, and he says something like, "What sort of god is cursing me? Like, what? Why do the gods hate me that I can't embrace that you're here, but I can't embrace you?" That's a really powerful moment when you read it. And of course, the saddest scene in the entire Odyssey, when Argo dies.
Mm.
Uh, which this sounds like I'm memeing or joking. I'm actually not. Like it's legitimately makes me tear up every time I read it. Like it's one of the saddest scenes in literature. Like that he's in disguise a beggar. Literally nobody at his home recognizes him. And then he sees Argo like lying there and he goes, "Oh," and he needs to hide that he recognizes him, of course. but he's trying not to get emotional because he recognizes the dog who's still somehow alive after 20 years. And he goes, "So who's that dog?" And then they go, "Oh, that's, he used to be the master's dog, but then they started treating him badly. So now he sleeps outside in the garbage or something." And then Argo sees Odysseus and gets up and walks over to him. And Odysseus can't acknowledge him because he's in disguise, right? So he just has to look. And then he dies.
Hmm.
It's such a sad scene, but it's also kind of beautiful because you get this impression of like Argo was holding on the whole time just to see Odysseus, and he made it, right? Like
Yes.
I always took it in a more positive way of like, oh, he hung on long enough to see his master before he died. You know, like and it's a very very touching scene. It works really well. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Epic the Musical, good adaptation. It's well done. Lyrically, extreme, very complex. Lots of setups and payoffs. I'm looking forward to following it. Uh, that's all. Have a nice night, everyone.
Yep. I'm looking forward to it as well for the finish, the completion, and then the inevitable burnout and downfall and people weeping on Twitter and Tumblr and stuff like that. And the
At least we'll still have the original soundtrack to listen
will
to.
always have the original soundtrack. Remember the heathen's rage and its sound and fury signifying nothing, nothing. But at least we can enjoy good music at least sometimes.
Yep.
All right, bye.